Right guys, how's it going? Right, there's no easy way to say this, so I won't beat about the bush. I have a health problem, specifically a heart problem. I'm currently undergoing tests and I will be having more visits around doctors and hospitals in the near future. But it looks very much like atherosclerosis and I'm suffering from angina caused by it. And suffice it to say that in a situation like this, I'm doing whatever I can to take it a bit easier regarding anything stressful. And I'm taking myself out for longer walks, etc, etc. Until this is properly under control, the videos will be a little bit less in-depth, or at least a fair bit shorter than usual. They might be a little bit later, and I'll likely not be going the extra mile regarding stuff like video editing, which has been taking me more than a whole day in some of these more recent cases. So with that said, and hopefully with expectations managed, let's get on with the video. So right, it was January 2018 and I got an email from a person I already knew. It was mostly talking about a few random topics and then this was dropped on me. Oh, by the way, Milan, Zen 3, is coming out in the first quarter of 2020 and it will have 4 threads per core. This was the same person who first told me about Rome being a chiplet architecture built at TSMC. And later on they sent me some more information. Milan will be built on TSMC's 7nm Plus, and it will be 64 cores, 256 threads. So really just confirmation. They also told me about Zen 4, the Genoa codename, and that it would come in 2021 along with DDR5 and Gen Z. So basically that was AMD's server roadmap years in advance. But it's important to note that roadmaps are of course subject to change, based on a variety of factors. For example, Rome was said for the longest time to be 48 cores, by various sources who have been very accurate many times. Rome is of course launching with 64 cores, but that doesn't mean there won't be 48 core parts too. There will be. So this information that I got on Milan, while likely correct, at the time in January 2018, may not be 100% accurate now. Now, I don't believe I ever talked about Milan in any previous video, but I can't say for sure. Regardless of that, I've been talking about it over at the Semi-Accurate forum, on Twitter, and on my Patreon Discord for the past year. I just never focused on it because Rome and Zen 2 are exciting enough. But taking a closer look at the information, 64 cores again, 4 threads per core. That's a nice potential boost in per core performance. We know that Zen 2 is being built on TSMC's current 7nm node. And we can see from their website that they actually have 2 7nm nodes. One optimised for mobile applications, which is your low power, your smartphones kind of thing, and the other for high performance computing applications. And that is of course the one AMD is using for all of their products that we know about. But this next 7nm node is 7nm Plus, which is 7nm with EUV, or extreme ultraviolet lithography. EUV is a topic all in itself, maybe for another day. But if we just concentrate on the PPA, which is performance, power and area improvements that the Plus node brings. And over at AnandTech, they've got a table showing it. This is the advertised PPA improvements, so what TSMC are claiming. So 7FF Plus, that's 7nm FinFET Plus versus 7nm FinFET. And we see power is around about 10% better. However, performance, around about the same. It's what AnandTech speculates because TSMC didn't make any claims on performance. Read into that what you will. But if you remember back to Forrest Norrod's presentation at the Rice Oil and Gas HPC conference, he did say that at this next node, there would be a regression in clock speeds without extreme measures being taken.
As we continually shrink our processes now, we don't get any more frequency. And really with this next node, without doing extraordinary things, we get less frequency.
That may also be why TSMC did not advertise performance. 7FF Plus could actually be lower performance than 7FF. But we do also see around about an extra 17% reduction in area. And any company would gladly take that shrink, simply for the economics. And if that works out as TSMC claims, then the same Zen 2 chiplet, which is around about 72 square millimeters, that should therefore be around only 60 square millimeters on this 7nm plus. That could be a point to consider later on. But clearly here we're not talking about anything like a huge performance, power or area improvement, unlike the one that we see between 7FF and 16FF+. This is a real node change, and I wouldn't even go as far as calling this a half node. It's really more like a tweak, but it's really all about bringing in EUV. But 10% power savings, a little bit more on area savings. Both of those could be used for SMT4, 4 threads per core. And obviously, as we learned throughout 2018, this leak I got back then was basically near 100% accurate. And the way I see these things, that made this information on Milan, Zen 3, likely also to be true, with the usual caveats for information so far out from release. But late on last year I got word from another source. Here's some new Milan information. It's the same as Rome, but now 80 cores. I was quite surprised by that and immediately got back saying, that is definitely different to what I was told a long time ago, which was Milan would still be 64 cores, but SMT4. The response though was adamant. 80 cores, that's what I saw. Now when I get conflicting information, I'll often have a quick hunt around to see if anyone else had heard something similar or something different. I talked to another source who was equally as adamant that Milan was still only 64 cores, and they also hadn't heard a thing about SMT4. So essentially that would be a very minor upgrade over Rome. That alone, however, is worth considering because if that were the case, would AMD truly give it the Zen 3 codename? Zen 2 is clearly a major change over Zen 1. It seems unlikely that Zen 3 would be a minor upgrade. But I then had a closer look through all my previous information, and I found something else that I had forgotten from yet another different source who said that Milan would be fully 7nm. So unlike Zen 2, which is 14nm IO die with 7nm chiplets, Milan would be 7nm plus in both. That made sense to me from the perspective that 7nm would be a lot cheaper when Milan launches next year. However, today we know that most of that IO die doesn't really scale very well with smaller nodes. So the area shrink and power savings just wouldn't really be there. It would shrink a little, and a little power would be saved. But by enough to justify the additional 7nm cost over the now very mature 16nm? Probably not. So I then went back to the previous source with this information, and again they were equally adamant that Milan would be staying as 64 7nm CPU cores and still the same 14nm IO die. Now I have 3 good sources telling me 3 different things. 2 sources say Milan stays at 64 cores, with one of them suggesting 4 threads per core while the other suggests still 2 threads, and one source saying it's gonna be 80 cores. Well, we know that 7nm plus gives around a 17% density improvement, so 80 cores could just about be reached with 2 more chiplets on the same package. If those chiplets shrink down to about 60 square millimeters or so, you could just about squeeze in 10 chiplets there with 8 cores each. It's a bit of a weird number though, and could mean there would be a requirement for a couple of dummy dies as well. The only other way to reach 80 cores would be to upgrade each chiplet to 10 cores rather than 8, but I like that idea even less. I am quite sure that AMD will stick to this 8 core chiplet now and just shrink it with each new node, while increasing core counts by adding chiplets. But I didn't give it a whole lot more thought past this, and we still don't have actual Rome specs yet, let alone the specs of the future successor. But back in the present, and a highly entertaining call held by Charlie of Semi-Accurate and the Susquehanna Financial Group. There were some real nuggets of information in this, and a user over at the AMD stock Reddit posted the juicier details. In this rather long list, some of this stuff is worth going over briefly even though it's not especially relevant to this video, so I'll just do that before focusing on the relevant parts. So Intel 10nm has had issues, which Charlie started pointing that out in mid-2015. This isn't news to anyone now of course, but back then it was. Cannon Lake 10nm, which launched in 2017. If you remember that single Lenovo laptop that was only sold in China, apparently the CPU in that was at single-digit yields. There were actually 2 CPUs based on the same design. Both of them were dual cores, and one of them had the graphics disabled. After that, he talked about a level of fear he had never seen around then from Intel sources. And that makes perfect sense, as really, Intel's major strength over the decades was their manufacturing. They were at least 1 and normally 2 nodes ahead of AMD and the rest of the industry. We know that started slipping at 14 nanometers, then they just lost it completely at 10. And now TSMC and Samsung as well are well ahead. Now after that he goes into a bunch of technical reasons for why they're having such a problem at 10 nanometers. Before stating that 75% of Intel's planned 10 nanometers capacity is no longer there, and that there would be no rabbit out of the hat, which would essentially mean for Intel a really rapid progression to their own 7 nanometers. That's just not likely to happen. The reality here is, no fab that fell behind in the race ever recovered, and Intel's own slides from years ago shows that. They just expected themselves to be the last man standing, not the increasingly more likely TSMC. A bit further down, and Intel's 10 nanometers is slower and its yields are less than 50% of the current 14 nanometers. And I guess this is a major point because anyone expecting Sunny Cove to make a difference is going to be very unpleasantly surprised. There is no chance of Intel getting anywhere near 5 GHz on 10 nanometers. Even with 8 cores, while AMD will be near 5 GHz with 16 cores. Even if Intel backports Sunny Cove to 14 nanometers, which is a rumour, they might get some decent clock speeds out of that, but the performance per watt is going to be atrocious. They will not be able to do that at anywhere near sane power levels. But moving on to AMD, and later on, Charlie confirms my information that Rome was already shipping to big customers, and that it launches really soon. And then we go on to the relevant part for the video when he says that AMD's Milan raises the bar significantly. It will be twice as fast as Cascade Lake. But then the real surprise with Milan will have 15 chiplets. Now, there was an awful lot more that could make videos on their own, but that'll do me for now. So that is now 4 Milan sources, all suggesting something different. And let's be clear, Charlie's record speaks for itself, but I also have a lot of trust in my 2 personal sources, and absolutely no reason to disbelieve the other source who said 64 cores. Before I get to figuring out which one is most likely to be correct, let's try to figure out what this 15 chiplet Milan could be, and if I can reconcile that with any of the rest of the information. Presumably with 15 chiplets, we're looking at 14 core chiplets and 1 IO chiplet. 14, like 10, doesn't really appear to fit all that well in symmetrical terms, and assuming the chiplets are still 8 cores each, that would be an enormous 112 cores. If you try out other numbers like 10 cores per chiplet, that would be 140 total cores. And if we drop down to 6 cores per chiplet, that would be 84. 84 is at least close to my leaked information of 80, but in architectural terms, it's just as unlikely, as 80 does not divide cleanly by 6. I think it's safe to say that 140 cores and even 112 cores is a total pipe dream. Remember, 7 nanometers plus offers only around 10% better power. 112 cores is 75% more than what Rome has. Even 80 and 84 would appear to be pushing quite a way past that 10% better power allowed, though obviously clock speeds could be reduced slightly to make those two work. Assuming Charlie is correct about 15 chiplets, and I am assuming that means the only realistic option here would be 84 cores, 14 chiplets of 6 cores each. It cannot possibly be 112, and if AMD had actually dropped down to 4 cores per chiplet, then that would be a regression in core count to only 56, which they are simply not gonna do. So that would have been how I interpreted this 15 chiplet information, until this happened next day. This final part of the video will contain a fair bit of speculation, and as you know, with speculation, it may come true or it may not come true, and also it may not come true soon but come true later, or parts of it may come true and others don't. Let's be clear, don't take any of this as fact or even as a likely outcome. With that said, I wouldn't be talking about it at all if I didn't believe in it at some level. Charlie's meeting with Susquehanna was followed closely by AMD and Cray's surprise announcement of Frontier, what is expected to be the world's fastest supercomputer, launching in 2021 with over 1.5 exaflops of processing power. 1 exaflop is 1 quintillion calculations per second. Quintillion. That's a billion billion. So Frontier is that billion calculations per second multiplied by 1.5 in one supercomputer. Each node in this supercomputer comprises one HPC and AI optimized AMD EPYC CPU and 4 purpose-built AMD Radeon Instinct GPUs. AMD also sent me a PR release containing a little extra information and some image resources that I'm using here. I just mentioned the custom AMD EPYC processor optimized for HPC and AI. Note here that it is utilizing a future Zen core, so it's either Zen 3 or Zen 4, not the current Zen 2 Rome generation. And next up was this slide showing an HPC customized Instinct card with high bandwidth memory. Then there was this slide on Infinity Fabric, which talks about a custom coherent fabric connecting, and I quote from the press release here, a tightly integrated 4 GPU to 1 CPU ratio per node. Okay, so where am I going with this? Well, you remember back in March when Forrest Norrod presented at the Rice Oil and Gas HPC conference? You probably do, as I talk about it in most videos, and I think I did in this one as well. But going back to that part where he said this.
But maybe the more important part of chiplet technology is that over time it allows more rapid innovation, because you no longer have to compose just one large monolithic die. If you want to change something, now you can change the I/O chiplet, you can change the CPU chiplet, you can have heterogeneous systems made with CPU and GPU cores intermingled in different chiplets on the same package, allowing, again, architectural innovation.
Now, I instantly speculated that this meant Navi and Rome, or Navi and Milan in one package. But I would. It could also mean something else though, perhaps even some custom-built EPYC processor with HPC customized compute engines. Take a look at my source table again. 2 say 64 cores, one says 80 cores and the other says 15 chiplets. All supposedly for Milan. Now let's assume that my 80 core source is correct. They were certainly adamant about it being 80 cores, so why not? And then let's take the most likely chiplet setup with that, which would be 10 chiplets with 8 cores each, and the 11th chiplet being the I/O chiplet. That leaves us with 4 chiplets left to reach Charlie's 15 chiplets for Milan. 4 chiplets left over? What could they possibly be? And of course the answer is, they could be these 4 purpose-built Radeon Instinct GPUs connected via this custom coherent fabric, creating a tightly integrated 4:1 GPU to CPU ratio per node. And that's the only sane way I can reconcile 15 chiplets actually making any kind of sense. That it ties in with 80 CPU cores, that's just gravy. But wait a minute, what about the high bandwidth memory, I hear you say? Well, recall back to the Frontier spec sheet and AMD Infinity Fabric, coherent memory across the node. How about, instead of each card having its own HBM2, each node has its own HBM2, stacked right on top of the I/O die. Now, I should say that I was kind of beaten to the punch here by YouTuber Moore's Law is Dead, who talked about this same thing a few days ago in this video. Please do check it out. But stacking HBM2 on the I/O die, have I gone mad? No, not at all. In fact, AMD first talked about this in 2017. The I/O die would be the perfect place to put it, as it's central and closest to the memory controllers. Plus it's not that high power draw, so the memory on top shouldn't be that difficult to keep cool. What's more, a slew of recent AMD patent discoveries by Underfox here unearthed a couple of gems on thermoelectric cooling for 3-dimensional stacked DRAM, and also arrangement and thermal management of 3D stacked dies. And if we just open up this patent and scroll down to the background of the invention, down to number 3, stacked dice arrangements involve placing or stacking one or more semiconductor chips on a base semiconductor chip. In some conventional variants, the base semiconductor chip is a high heat dissipating device, such as a microprocessor. And the stacked chips are sometimes memory devices. Custom AMD EPYC processor, HPC customized compute engines, a custom coherent fabric with a bit of HBM2 die stacking on top. The end result being the first fully optimized CPU and GPU design for supercomputing. Wait a minute though, if you add HBM2 on the package, then that's way more than 15 chiplets. But it's not. At least not according to AMD's definition of chiplets, which is the disintegration of a monolithic chip into smaller parts. HBM2 chips are chips, not chiplets. Now to be clear again, I have no idea whatsoever as to what information Charlie was given, and I could be way off here. What's likely is that all this here will have some basis in the truth, and we'll hear more about it in 2021. But is it just me, or is all of this master plan stuff accelerating? Intel can barely catch their breath before being pummeled by some new, almost magical technology advance. And make no mistake about it, AMD are already looking past this stuff and on to the next thing, and Zen 4. So to finish this one off, what about my other two leakers and their 64-core Milan CPUs? They're probably both right as well. See, these 64-core Milan CPUs are likely the real Milan CPUs. You remember that thing about Matisse being the Zen 2 chiplets and the desktop optimized I/O die? Well, Rome, as we know, is the Zen 2 chiplets with the data center optimized I/O die. Milan CPUs are Zen 3 chiplets with data center optimized I/O die. This custom built EPYC and Instinct thing for Frontier, that's not actually Milan, although it is very likely to be based on Zen 3. Milan is simply AMD's own codename for the CPU package based on Zen 3, which succeeds Rome next year. And that is how I tied 4 good sources together in a way that finally made sense. I'll catch you later, guys.